Lonely widow bought 10 starving orphans at the market. What happened next, no one expected.
She didn't bargain. She didn't explain. She just counted out the silver coin by coin, while the town watched in silence. 10 starving children, one woman dressed in black, and a decision that would shake every soul in that dusty frontier market. What kind of person buys children with no plan, no help, and no one left to love? This is the story of Mercy Whitmore, a widow shunned by her town, haunted by her past, and accused of the unthinkable. But beneath her silence lies a purpose no one could predict, and a secret buried deeper than grief. As you follow this tale, you'll question what redemption looks like, and whether love can grow in the coldest of places. Sometimes, the harshest people carry the gentlest intentions, and the loneliest hearts end up saving more lives than they ever thought possible. Before we begin, which moment in this story speaks to you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And if stories like this stir something in you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us. Because what comes next, no one in town saw it coming.
A lonely woman helps children, or so they thought. The market was half empty that morning, yet the air felt heavy like something unsaid was hanging just above the dust. Folks didn't talk loud when she walked by. They didn't greet her, didn't nod, they just stared. Mercy Whitmore wore black like it was sewn into her skin. Same dress she'd worn for years, same boots, same silence. She moved like someone who'd stopped trying to be part of the world, but hadn't quite left it either. The coins in her hand looked heavy, not just in weight but in meaning, clinking sharp as she walked toward Tobias Crow's wagon where 10 children stood like forgotten things, ragged, filthy, some too small to be walking on their own. Their clothes hung off their bones, and their eyes, well, their eyes were older than any child's ought to be. Tobias, pipe clenched between yellow teeth, didn't blink when she stepped forward. "I'll take all 10. He laughed. Then he realized she wasn't joking. "All 10? He sputtered. "Ma'am, that's quite the burden. These little ones need feeding, washing, work." Mercy didn't flinch. She untied the leather pouch, letting the silver spill into his palm like a slow storm. A hush rippled across the market. Even the chickens seemed to stop scratching the dirt. A woman named Ida muttered to her sister, "Fool woman's gone mad again. Ain't got enough to feed herself, let alone 10 brat." The marshal stepped closer, his boots crunching against sun-baked gravel. "Mrs. Whitmore, what exactly do you intend to do with 10 children?" Mercy turned to him, face unreadable. "That's my business." And that was it. No justification, no soft words, just a statement cold as stone. The children didn't speak. They watched her, huddled close together. The oldest, a girl with tangled hair and dirt smudged across one cheek, stepped forward like she had nothing left to lose. "Are you gonna hurt us?" Mercy looked down at her, just for a second. Then she crouched to meet the girl's eye. "What's your name?" "Clementine," the girl answered, barely above a whisper. Mercy's gaze didn't soften, but something shifted barely. "Get in the wagon." No promises, no smiles. Just the kind of order you give when you don't expect to be questioned. The children climbed in, one by one. No one spoke. The wagon creaked beneath them as Mercy climbed onto the front board and took the rein. Tobias spat into the dust and called after her, "Hope you get good work out 'em before winter comes." People watched her leave, and no one waved. No one offered help, just whispers thick with suspicion. They called her bitter. They said she'd gone cold since her husband died in that fire. They claimed she'd lost her mind, or maybe her soul. But Mercy didn't look back. She drove away with 10 children behind her, none of them knowing whether they'd just been saved or sold into a different kind of silence. Clementine sat in the back corner of the wagon, arms around the smallest of the group, a boy who couldn't stop shaking. Her eyes stayed fixed on Mercy's back, the straight line of her spine, the tightness in her grip on the rein. She didn't trust her. Not yet. Not fully. But something in the woman's silence. It didn't feel empty. It felt like a house boarded up from the inside, still standing, still holding something. And though the girl didn't understand it yet, that was the first kind of safety she'd ever known. because not all protection comes wrapped in warmth. Sometimes it looks like someone who's forgotten how to be gentle but still chooses to stay. Sometimes it's a hand reaching out without a single word.
Western story with emotional twist on a dusty road. The wagon creaked beneath its own weight, wheels digging shallow grooves into the dry earth. The sun hung low but fierce, flattening the hills and painting the landscape in shades of scorched gold. Dust rose behind them in lazy curls, the kind that clung to skin, hair, and memory. 10 children sat in the back, quiet as ghosts. Their eyes didn't wander far mostly. They stayed on Mercy's unmoving shoulders. No one dared speak.
Some thought this might be their last wagon ride before disappearing into a life of endless labor. Others clung to the barest thread of hope, though even that was starting to fray. Clementine held onto the side rail, her knuckles white. She watched the road, but more than that, she watched the woman steering them. The widow's back was straight, but not stiff, determined, not angry. Still, there was a hardness there that unsettled her. Not cruelty, something deeper, something shaped by years of silence and loss. The wagon turned past a stretch of rock that marked the edge of town, just as the sound of hooves came up fast from behind. Marshal Boone galloped into view, his horse kicking up a cloud of red dirt. He slowed beside the wagon, jaw set, eyes shadowed beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Mrs. Whitmore," he called. "Pull over, we need to talk." Mercy didn't flinch, but she pulled the reins gently, the wagon easing to a stop with a long, low creak.
Boone swung off his horse and walked up alongside her. "You're not seriously taking all 10 of those kids to your ranch, are you?" Mercy said nothing, just looked straight ahead. He tried again, softer this time. "That's a lot of mouths to feed. Your land's dry. Your livestock, what's left of it, ain't enough. And folks are worried you've taken on more than you can carry." Her eyes moved to him at last. Not warm, not angry, just steady. "That's my burden," she said. "Not theirs." "However," Boone exhaled through his nose, "it's not just your burden when there are children involved. You don't have kin, no one to help. What happens if something goes wrong?" Mercy turned fully toward him now, her voice like river rocks scraping against metal. "Then I'll figure it out, like I always have." The children sat still, watching from the back. No one moved, but their ears were wide open. A boy with a torn collar looked from Mercy to Boone and back again. None of them had ever seen two adults argue without yelling. It was almost scarier this way. "You plan to raise them?" Boone asked. "Train them? Use them?" Mercy narrowed her eyes. "You ask too many questions for a man who's never lifted a hand to feed one of them." A long silence stretched between them. Then Boone nodded, once. Not in agreement, more in resignation. "All right," he said. "But I'll be checking in, regularly." "You do what you think you need to," Mercy replied. "So will I." He tipped his hat, more out of habit than courtesy, and mounted back up. As he rode off, the dust curled back toward the wagon like smoke. Clementine stared at Mercy, studying the lines at the corners of her eyes, the set of her jaw. There was no kindness there, but no fear either. Something about that unsettled her more than anything the marshal had said. She didn't trust Mercy. Not yet. But she was starting to wonder if trust was the right thing to look for. Sometimes, Clementine thought, safety didn't feel like softness. Sometimes, it felt like a door that never slammed, a hand that never hit, a voice that didn't lie. And in that moment, as the wagon lurched forward once more, she realized she wasn't sure what kind of story she'd just stepped into. But it wasn't the kind that fit neatly into good or bad. It was something else. Something harder to name. Something that might turn out to be worth surviving. Sleep Story Cowboy. A house too quiet for comfort. The wagon slowed as the path narrowed, cutting through tall, wind-bent grass that hadn't seen rain in months. In the distance, the house emerged like something forgotten by time, its frame still upright, but wearied. The paint had long peeled away, and a few shutters dangled from rusty hinges like loose teeth. A place once lived in, then left behind. Mercy didn't announce their arrival. She simply pulled the reins and stepped down, her boots crunching against dry earth. "Out?" she said. The children hesitated, eyes darting between one another. Then Clementine led the way, helping a smaller girl down before stepping onto the soil herself. The house loomed ahead, too still for comfort. No barking dog. No smoke from the chimney. No welcome. And yet, Mercy didn't take them through the front door. Instead, she walked along the side of the house toward a second building, long, low, and timber-framed. The kind of place you'd expect to find hay or broken tools. She unlocked the door with a slow, deliberate turn of the key. Inside, it smelled of dust and wood oil, but it was warm. Sunlight filtered in through the high windows, soft and golden. And there, against the far wall, were 10 small beds, all neatly made, each one with a folded blanket, a pillow. At the foot of every mattress sat a wooden chest with a single carved initial. Clementine stopped just inside the doorway, mouth parted, breath caught in her throat. The boy beside her whispered, "This ain't a workshop." She answered without thinking, voice barely above air. "It looks like a home." Mercy turned then, not to explain, not to smile, but to point. A board hung near the door. On it, in sharp, controlled handwriting, were the rules. Wake at dawn. Breakfast at 6. Work begins at 7. Sopa at 7. Lights out at 8. No talking after dark. No leaving the property. No questions about before. The youngest child whimpered. Clementine felt her stomach turn, not from hunger but uncertainty. What was this place? Not cruel, not kind, something else. Mercy's eyes swept over them one by one. "Put your things by the beds," she said. "We don't have things," someone murmured. Mercy didn't answer. Later, she showed them the washroom, basic but clean. There was a table set already in the main hall with metal bowls and spoons. The smell of beans and cornbread made more than one child swallow hard. No one ate until she sat down. No one spoke. They weren't sure if they were allowed to. That night, after the lanterns were snuffed out and the beds began to creak with restless bodies, Clementine stared at the rafters, heart beating somewhere in her throat. She wasn't afraid, not exactly. But comfort, when you haven't known it in so long, can feel like a trap, like something sweet left in a wolf's den. The sheets were clean, the air was still, and yet, there was a silence here that didn't feel accidental. It was the kind that had a shape, a weight, a reason. And while the others drifted into uneasy sleep, Clementine kept her eyes open just in case kindness came with a price they hadn't yet been told. Because sometimes, the cruelest prisons are the ones that feel almost safe.
Cowboy fiction with a man who watches like a hawk. The next morning came early, too early for children who hadn't known a proper bed in months. Dawn hadn't even finished rising before Mercy's boots echoed across the wooden floor, her shadow falling long across the rows of still sleeping bodies. "Up," she said. Not cruel, not loud, just final. One by one, the children pulled themselves out of warm blankets, some blinking at the strange ache of a full stomach, others already steeling themselves for whatever came next. Clementine helped the youngest girl with her shoes, though the child still fumbled with the laces. They moved in silence, dressing, lining up, unsure whether today meant kindness or cost. Breakfast was simple porridge and a slice of bread, but it was hot. Real food. They ate fast, too fast, like it might be taken away mid-bite. No one spoke. Mercy stood at the end of the table with her arms crossed, watching, not eating. Then the door opened. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. The man who entered didn't belong to the dust and tired wood of the ranch. His clothes were too fine, his boots polished, his coat trimmed with silver button, but there was dust on his cuffs and calculation in his eye. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said smoothly, tipping his hat. "I heard about your recent acquisition." Mercy's shoulders stiffened. Blackwood. The children froze. Clementine gripped her spoon tightly, not because she knew who he was, but because Mercy's posture changed. Not in fear, in readiness. Blackwood scanned the room, lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. 10 healthy workers. That should move things along nicely. No one moved. Clementine's throat went dry. She looked at Mercy, at Blackwood, and back again. The words didn't make sense, not completely, but the tone did. It was the same tone Tobias had used at the market, the same tone men used when talking about horses, or grain, or livestock, not people. Mercy didn't respond. She stepped forward just a half step, but enough to place her between Blackwood and the table where the children sat. Blackwood chuckled. "Don't worry, I'm not here to collect. Yet." "Oh." Then he turned to the children, offering a smile too smooth to trust. "Rest up, little ones. Tomorrow the real work begins." He left with the same quiet confidence he came in with, but his footsteps echoed long after he was gone. Mercy didn't speak. She watched the door close, then turned back toward them. Her face was unreadable, not angry, not frightened, just blank. Clementine stared at her. For the first time, she didn't know what to feel. She wanted to hate Mercy, wanted to call her a liar, but she couldn't forget how the blankets had been folded, how the porridge had been hot, how Mercy had stepped in front of them like a shield. Was she protecting them, or was she part of something worse? The question hung in the room like a breath no one dared exhale. That night, Clementine didn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between the creaks of old wood and the far-off sound of coyotes. Somewhere behind the walls, she imagined a clock ticking, not loud, but steady, like something waiting. And for the first time, she wondered not just where they were, but what they had been brought here for. Because Mercy hadn't denied anything. And sometimes, silence says more than words ever could. Healing story about orphans and the needle. The workshop smelled of dust and fabric starch, and the air inside never seemed to move. Long tables filled the room from wall to wall, each one lined with chairs too tall for small backs and spools of thread that never stopped spinning. Mercy assigned each child a station and a quota: 5 shirts, or 3 dresses, or 2 blankets. By sunset, no exceptions. "If you don't meet it," she said flatly, "you don't eat." There was no threat in her voice, just a fact, like she was reciting the weather or listing the parts of a stove. The children got to work. At first, they fumbled. Needles dropped, threads tangled, fingers pricked. A boy named Samuel wept silently when his pattern tore straight down the middle. Clementine helped where she could, whispering to the youngest, swapping places when someone panicked, but mostly they were left to figure it out alone. Mercy didn't hover. She watched, eyes sharp, hands behind her back. Her boots never made a sound, yet somehow everyone knew when she was standing behind them. She didn't praise. She didn't scold. When she corrected a child, it was with a tap on the table or a gesture toward the stitching. No softness, but no cruelty either. By the 3rd hour, the room was quiet in a way that only exhaustion can make. Little backs hunched, lips pressed shut. The air tasted of thread and sweat. Then Clementine saw it. The youngest girl, Lily, no older than 6, was shaking too hard to thread her needle. Her fingers trembled every time she tried to push the thread through the eye. The more she failed, the harder she shook. Finally, she just froze, hands limp in her lap. Mercy stood beside her. Clementine held her breath, but Mercy didn't speak, didn't scold. Instead, her hand moved slowly, almost cautiously. She reached down, took the needle, and threaded it herself. Her fingers weren't steady either. In fact, they trembled worse than Lily's. But she got it through, tied a small knot, and placed it gently back into the girl's hands. Then she walked away. No one said a word. Later, when the sun had begun to slide behind the trees, Clementine's needle slipped. She flinched as it sliced her palm, a thin, red line blooming fast. Mercy was there in seconds. She snatched Clementine's wrist not roughly, but firm, and pulled a cloth from her pocket. Pressed it tight. "You weren't paying attention," she said. "I'm tired," Clementine snapped. Mercy didn't let go. "So is everyone." Clementine yanked her arm back. "You don't care. You just want us to work." And that's when it happened. Not a slap. Not this time. Just a pause. Mercy blinked, like something had gotten caught behind her eyes. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked at Clementine for a long moment, longer than anyone else ever had. Then she turned and walked away. That night, supper was quiet. A few children hadn't met their quotas. They sat with empty bowls, heads down. No one begged. No one dared. Clementine chewed slowly, watching Mercy from across the room. The woman didn't eat. She didn't speak. She just stared out the window, her reflection barely visible in the darkening glass. There was something about her posture, something Clementine couldn't name, like Mercy was waiting for something, or someone. Not forgiveness, not even understanding, just a reason. And Clementine, who had grown up learning never to trust too much, found herself wondering, was there such a thing as love that didn't look like love? Could it live inside someone who never smiled, never soothed, never said the right word? And if it could, was this what it looked like?
Stories 2. Fall Asleep 2. The question that broke the night. The wind had shifted by nightfall, brushing dry grass against the walls of the longhouse like fingers tapping from the other side. Inside, the children had crawled under their thin quilts, bones aching, hands sore, bellies warm enough to make them believe they'd survive another day. But no one slept easily. Clementine lay wide-eyed, her arms folded across her chest, gaze fixed on the ceiling beams above her head. The room was dim, only moonlight drifting through the slats. She listened to the breaths of the others, the occasional sniffle, the rustle of limbs turning in half-dreams. It should have felt peaceful. It didn't. Something in her chest was pulling tight again, like it always did when she thought too long. She slipped from bed in silence, the floor cold under her bare feet, and padded toward the front of the house. The door was ajar, a sliver of lamplight bleeding through. Mercy sat alone on the porch, shawl wrapped around her shoulders, rocking slow in a chair that creaked every other breath. She didn't look up as Clementine stepped into view. The girl hovered in the doorway. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Clementine's voice, soft but clear, cut through the dark. "Are you going to sell us?" Mercy's rocking didn't stop, but she stilled her hands, resting them in her lap. It took a long time for her to speak. When she did, her voice was thin like paper torn too many times. "I had a daughter once." That was all she said. No name, no age, no what happened or why. Just a fact dropped like a stone into still water. Clementine waited, but the silence returned, heavier than before. She didn't know what she expected. An apology? A promise? Maybe just the truth. What she got was a feeling. One she couldn't name. Not trust. Not comfort. But maybe a beginning of something that could become either. Then the sound came distant at first, then louder. Hooves. A dozen horses, maybe more, thundering up the road. Mercy rose at once, her face snapping back into stone. She moved past Clementine with a hand on her shoulder, firm but not harsh. "Stay inside." The girl obeyed, retreating behind the doorframe, peering through the gap in the boards. Marshal Boone was first to dismount, followed by 3 deputies. Behind them came Virgil Granger and a few town men, armed, tense. Lanterns swung in their hands, casting long shadows over the dry yard. "Mrs. Whitmore," Boone called. "We need to talk." She stepped down from the porch without flinching. "It's past dark, Marshal." He didn't smile. "We've had complaints. Folks say they've seen the children working after hours. That's against territorial law." "That's a lie," she said. But her voice lacked heat. "We also heard about your visitor, Blackwood. Been asking around about your goods. What kind of operation are you running here, Mercy?" Clementine held her breath, hidden behind the wood. She could feel the tension building, like the moment before a storm finally breaks. Virgil's voice was softer. "We knew you when you were a girl. Your father was an honest man. This ain't like you." Mercy didn't respond. One of the deputies stepped forward. "Do the children sleep here? Work here? Are you keeping records?" "Why does it matter?" she asked. "Because people are starting to wonder if you're saving them, or just hiding what you're really doing." Behind the door, Clementine pressed her hand to her mouth. Her heart pounded, but not from fear, from confusion. What was Mercy doing? Who was she really? Because tonight, for the first time, Clementine saw something in the woman's eyes that wasn't anger or silence. It was grief, still raw, still dangerous. And in that instant, she understood something unspoken. People only tell their stories when the pain has nowhere else to go. Not to ask for pity, not even for understanding, but because silence, when kept too long, begins to burn. Mercy hadn't meant to share that sliver of her past, but she did. And now the question wasn't whether she was hiding something. The question was, what had she lost? that made her build her life around silence. And who had she become trying to live inside it?
A fictional western for sleep with contracts and firelight. The tension sat thick in the yard, pressed between the hiss of lanterns and the rustle of horses shifting restlessly on dry dirt. No one moved, but everyone felt the storm quiet, coiled, ready to snap. Marshal Boone's voice dropped an octave as he said, "Mercy, if you've got something to say, now's the time." Mercy didn't blink. She reached into the folds of her shawl, fingers slow, deliberate. For a moment, the deputies stiffened, expecting metal, maybe, a weapon. But what she pulled out was paper, not yellowed, not worn, folded tight and flat, preserved like something sacred. "This," she said, lifting it high so the lantern caught its edge, "is the original deed to this ranch, signed by Judge Harland, witnessed and sealed." The crowd stirred. Virgil stepped closer, squinting. "Blackwood said I owed him," Mercy continued. "That my husband had debts. That if I didn't cooperate, he'd take the land and the children with it." She paused, voice steady now. "But the truth is, my husband never owed that man a dime. And everything Blackwood's done since has been built on lies." Boone took the deed with careful hands, scanning it slowly. His brow furrowed. "Looks legitimate." "It is," Mercy said. "And I've got more. Letters, contracts, records of every child he's tried to funnel through this place." From the porch, a small voice cut through the murmurs. "I saw the contracts, too." Clementine stepped forward into the circle of light, chin lifted, hands at her side. "They weren't real. I can read. Better than most grown folks. The ones he showed, Tobias said we'd be free at 18, said we'd get paid." She turned, locking eyes with Blackwood. "But you told Tobias to tear them up. You made new ones, said we'd work until we dropped, and no one would ever find out." For a beat, all anyone could hear was the wind. Blackwood barked a short, humorless laugh. "You expect them to take the word of a street brat." But one of his own men shifted beside him. "She's telling the truth," he muttered. "We've been changing contracts for years, selling kids to mines, factories. Nobody asks questions out there." Blackwood turned, fury sparking. "Shut your mouth." "Don't," Boone said sharply, hand near his holster now. The second hired man took a step back, raising his palms. "I'm not dying for this. I didn't sign on to traffic children." Suddenly, Blackwood stood alone. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Then Mercy spoke again, soft, low, but with a weight that made every man listen. "You took my daughter," she said. 7 years old. Said it was for a debt that never existed. I buried an empty box for her, and I've been burying silence ever since." Her voice didn't shake. "But you didn't take the truth. You didn't take what I knew. And you don't get to walk away now that I've found the courage to speak it." The lantern light flickered against her face, throwing long shadows. No triumph, no vengeance. Just a woman who had carried her pain long enough and had finally decided to set it down out in the open, where it could no longer rot her from the inside. No one cheered. No one clapped. But something shifted. Boone turned to his deputies. "Put him in the wagon. We've got enough to hold him." They moved without hesitation. Blackwood didn't struggle. He looked smaller than he had a moment ago, his fine coat now dust-stained, his boots sinking into the same dirt he once believed beneath him. Clementine stepped beside Mercy, but said nothing. She didn't need to, because for the first time since that wagon rolled into the yard, she wasn't looking for signs of danger. She was watching for signs of truth. And in Mercy's silence in her eyes, in her steadiness, she saw it. The kind of justice that doesn't shout, doesn't beg. It just waits until someone's finally ready to listen. A classic cowboy narrative of truth buried in floorboards. After Blackwood was shackled and loaded into the back of the marshal's wagon, the crowd didn't move. The firelight flickered across weathered faces, and no one quite knew what to do next. There was no applause, no shouts of victory. Just that strange stillness that comes when the noise has finally stopped and something softer begins to rise. Mercy didn't return to the house right away. She stood there in the yard, the hem of her dress brushing dry grass, the deed still clutched in her hand. Her fingers trembled not from fear, but from release, a kind of lightness, unfamiliar, pressed against her chest, as if her body no longer knew how to hold itself up without the weight she'd carried for so long. "I'm not finished," she said quietly. Marshall Boone turned to her, brows lifted. Mercy walked past the porch, around the side of the house to a low door set into the ground, a root cellar most had assumed was for potatoes, maybe tools. She knelt, worked the lock loose, and pulled open the hatch. The lantern Boone held cast long shadows across the packed earth walls. Mercy stepped down, reached behind a stack of burlap, and pulled out a small wooden box, unassuming, unlabeled. Inside were papers, dozens of them, some contracts, others letters, ledgers, even small scraps of fabric with initials sewn into the corners. "I've been documenting everything," she said. "For 2 years. Every child Blackwood sold, every name, every date. Some didn't make it. Some disappeared before I could reach them. But I kept a record. I kept everything." She handed the box to Boone like it was something sacred, and in a way, it was. The story of the silenced, preserved not in memory, but in handwriting and ink. "He thought if he kept me scared, he'd keep me quiet," Mercy said, eyes still fixed on the dark cellar. "But fear is like grief. It doesn't die, it just waits. And then one day, you decide to stop carrying it alone." Virgil Granger stepped forward, voice low. "Why didn't you tell us? Why hide all this?" Mercy's answer was simple. "Because I didn't trust that you'd believe me. Not until I had more than words." She turned to Clementine then. The girl had come closer, still watching, still measuring. "There's something else," Mercy added. She led them back inside the main house, to the room none of the children had yet seen. Behind a faded curtain in the hallway, a door had been nailed shut. She pulled the nails free, one by one, and opened it. Inside was a small bedroom bare, except for a wooden trunk at the foot of the bed and a single dress laid out across the blanket. The fabric was old but clean. Next to it sat a pair of shoes no bigger than Clementine's. "I kept it the way she left it," Mercy said. "I couldn't make peace with burying an empty box, but I could keep this." The children gathered behind her, silent. She was 7. Her name was Ruth. Blackwood's men took her like she was cattle. Told me it was payment for a debt I never owed. Her voice cracked, but just once. Then steady. "I thought if I could save just one more child, maybe it would make sense again. Maybe not the past, but something ahead." Clementine stepped into the room. She didn't speak. She simply sat at the edge of the bed, rested her hand on the dress, and looked up at Mercy with something in her eyes that wasn't pity. It was understanding. Quiet. Full. "I'm not Ruth," she said softly. "I know," Mercy replied. "But I still see her. In all of you." No one cried. Not really. But if someone had looked closely, they might have seen tears in Clementine's lashes, or the way Mercy touched the windowsill as if grounding herself. Outside, the lanterns had gone dim. The men from town had dispersed, most walking away slower than they came. Not because they doubted Mercy anymore, but because they were reckoning with the shame of not seeing what had been in front of them all along. And Blackwood. He didn't speak again. He sat hunched in the back of the wagon, eyes darting not toward Mercy, but toward the box Boone now held. The truth was no longer his to twist. Mercy stood on the porch as the horses pulled away, the dust rising one last time into the evening air. Clementine stood beside her, not holding hands, just near. The porch creaked beneath their weight. Nothing in Mercy's face spoke of triumph, but something had cracked, not broken, just loosened. And in that quiet, something warm began to settle. It wasn't justice, not exactly, but it was the end of fear. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing a heart can reclaim. Home is where someone fights for you. The days that followed were quieter, not silent the way they had been before, fearful and tight-lipped, but slow, steady, and filled with small sounds. The rhythmic click of needles, the soft laughter of children trying to remember how to play, the scrape of spoons in morning bowls. There was no celebration after Blackwood was taken. No bonfire, no cheers. Mercy didn't change overnight. She didn't suddenly become warm or open, didn't start patting heads or telling bedtime stories. But something had shifted. She let the children speak more freely at dinner. She stopped checking their quotas quite so harshly. And once, when the youngest boy dropped his cup, she knelt without a word and helped him clean it up. It wasn't kindness in the way stories usually tell it. It was presence, consistency, a sort of protection that didn't need explaining. Then came the morning Clementine and Samuel asked for extra fabric scraps, mostly, and thread in 4 different shades. Mercy raised an eyebrow but handed it over without question. They didn't tell her what it was for. It took them 2 weeks. Each child stitched something, a letter, a flower, a small design they had learned from Mercy's teaching. Clementine did the lettering herself, hunched over late into the evenings while the others slept. When it was finished, they folded it into a square and hid it beneath Samuel's mattress. And then, one evening, just as the sun was going down, they laid it across the front room, a quilt, 10 squares across, each with its own pattern. Imperfect. Some seams crooked. One corner unfinished because Lily had fallen asleep while stitching it. But it was whole. And in the center, embroidered in careful, uneven thread, were the words, "Home is where someone fights for you." Mercy stood in the doorway, hands still covered in flour from baking. She didn't step forward, didn't say anything. Her eyes scanned the blanket. Then the children. Then Clementine. No one moved. She bent slowly, picked up the quilt, held it to her chest like it might vanish if she gripped too hard. And though she didn't cry, not the way people expect, her hands trembled as she draped it gently over the mantel, just above the fireplace that hadn't been lit since Ruth disappeared. That night, when the embers finally glowed again, they cast their light not just on the walls but on something rebuilt, something returned. Clementine didn't ask to hug her. She simply stepped forward and did. Mercy didn't pull away. It wasn't a perfect embrace. A little stiff, a little unsure, but it stayed. Long enough for something to pass between them, something unspoken, stitched from pain and patience and the smallest beginnings of trust. Mercy still wore black. She still kept the rules posted on the wall, but from that day on, the doors of the house remained unlocked. And each morning, as the children rose to begin again, they passed beneath a quilt made not to warm bodies but to remind hearts that they mattered. Not because someone said so, but because someone had chosen to stay. And sometimes, that's the closest thing to family a child ever gets. In saving them, she found herself. Mercy never spoke of Ruth again, not aloud. Not in the way people tell stories over tea or in church pews. But some nights, long after the children had gone to bed and the wind tapped gently against the shutters, she would sit by the fire, sifting through a small wooden box filled with savings ledgers. Each one bore a name in careful script. Each entry a note of progress: $2 earned from embroidery, 5 for carpentry, 1 for hand-sewn boots sent to town. She ran her fingers along the numbers like reading the chapters of lives she had helped shape, not as a savior, just as someone who stayed. Clementine began teaching the younger children their letters. Samuel built shelves and benches and a cradle for the neighbor's baby. The workshop no longer echoed with fear but with the soft thrum of things being made, things built to last. The ranch changed, but not with fanfare. There were no banners, no declaration, just the slow unfolding of ordinary grace, children laughing without looking over their shoulders, meals shared without hunger's edge, hands that once flinched now reaching to hold. And Mercy, who once believed she'd been carved hollow by grief, learned how to sit under the porch roof at sunset and not feel the ache of everything she'd lost. Instead, she listened to the sounds of small feet running through dry grass, to the scratch of pencils, to the hum of life continuing. She had not brought Ruth back, but she had built something that might have saved her. And in that quiet, steady love, stitched not with words but with days, she finally came home to herself. In the end, it wasn't the silver coins that changed everything. It was the quiet, stubborn love of a woman who refused to give up on children the world had already forgotten. Mercy didn't save them with kindness. She saved them with resolve, with routine, with shelter, and with a love that looked nothing like what they were used to, but stayed. The greatest lesson? Healing doesn't always arrive in soft words. It sometimes comes wrapped in rules, silence, and a quilt sewn by trembling hands. Comment below. Which part of the story hit you the hardest? What truth did you carry away from Mercy and her 10 children? And if you've ever seen yourself in that orphan child, if you've ever wished someone might reach out first, then here, there's always a story waiting for you. Subscribe now so that when the night feels long, you'll always find a voice that understands. As the fire fades and the quilt hangs quietly on the wall, ask yourself, who would you have been if someone like Mercy had found you first?